What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our ACC football channel.
This is an off-season topic that I've thrown out in previous off-seasons that's become a whole lot of fun in just kind of exploring the history and the favorites and the worst and the best, and then looking forward to what might be maybe a little on the hypothetical side, but it's always fun to imagine. All right, let's look at Notre Dame's illustrious past. So, wow, you've got a landscape that few can rival when it comes to great wins, historic wins, impactful wins, or maybe for you, they're just meaningful for a different reason and aren't necessarily the games that most of us would think of. But whether you want to go the full all-time scale that goes back into the archives or whatever your frame of reference, Ben, the wins that have resonated with you the most.
All right, so, I was born in 91, so I really became a Notre Dame football fan that, kind of cared, I guess, kind of by the late 90s when I started to understand football, I guess. So that's kind of like my frame of reference point. So there were, I guess whenever I became a Notre Dame fan, it wasn't particularly real exciting. And then, Charlie White or Tyrone Willingham, Charlie Weiss came along and it wasn't exciting at all. So with the exception of one or two good seasons in there. So I don't know, the wins, I guess, that stick out. I think both times that Notre Dame played at USC to kind of clinch their undefeated regular seasons, both of those wins. So we're talking, I guess, 2011 and then just recently here in 2018. Those were the two wins, I think, that were probably the two most impactful wins for me. I can kind of remember sitting around on the edge of my seat for both of those. This most recent one, I was actually coaching a basketball game when the game started. It wasn't going real well for Notre Dame at first, but catching the end of those games and just like the jubilation of Notre Dame's competing were really impactful ones. I don't know. I think, my dad, who passed away this time last year, was a big Notre Dame fan, and I can think back to like certain games with him that I was at that weren't necessarily huge games, but I can think back to a game where Brady Quinn hit Jeff Samardzija for a really long 60-some yard touchdown against UCLA late to win that game. I think it was like a 20-17 type of a game. That was one that kind of sticks out. So, those three, I think, just because, two competing for national title type things, and then just kind of being there for some exciting moments with my dad are kind of the ones that stick out for me personally.
Ben Belden joining us from Slap the Sign, talking Notre Dame history and his frame of reference going back to the late 90s, about 20 years in regards to Notre Dame's big wins and excruciating losses. So we turn the tables on you now, Ben. And for the historic, great program, what this becomes is the wins just pile up on each other. And even though Notre Dame has not had the best of the last 20 years in its history, but still, obviously, the wins far outweigh the losses in terms of numbers. But when the expectations are high and you're trying to compete for championships and have those type of hopes for your football program, obviously the losses are more impactful, more crushing, and stay with you for the average person. So when you look back upon your Notre Dame fandom, what are the losses that still stay with you?
I mean, I could talk about this. I could talk for a half hour about this, to be honest with you. To name a few, definitely the infamous Bush push game of 2005, where Notre Dame had, people always talk about that final play where Reggie Bush was pushed into the end zone by Matt Leinart. But, before that, even, Notre Dame being up 31-28, USC had a 4th and 9 deep in their own territory, and a Notre Dame cornerback, Ambrose Wooden, got beat for 60 some odd yards, which set up then USC's, the theatrics at the end of that game. That's definitely takes the cake. I can think of a couple other ones. Probably another really excruciating one was going down to Florida State. They were 6-0, I believe, 5-0, 6-0 at the time. And the phantom offensive pass interference, not that it wasn't necessarily offensive pass interference, but pass interference that took away that last touchdown that would have given them the win at Florida State that was not called on. Notre Dame ran the same play in the red zone that whole game, and it wasn't called until the final possession. So that was excruciating. And then just one more, I guess, guess, watching, having Stanford, and this is 2015, having Stanford, down late in that game at Stanford in 2015. Notre Dame was 10-1 and maybe on their way to the college football playoff if they won that game. And Stanford kicks a field goal at the end after some very porous prevent defense from the Irish. That was another excruciating one as well. But like I say, there's probably 4 or 5 more right there with those ones. But those are the 3 that I think of right off the bat.
Absolutely. The wins and the losses, the best and the worst. We're running it down with Ben Belden from Slap the Sign, talking Notre Dame football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So if you love the game we love, and if you don't, I have no idea why you're watching. So this is the place to be for college football discussion, debate, and analysis each and every day. Lock it into the voice of college football. Please like, comment, and share the videos and subscribe, of course. All right, Ben, we've talked about the games. Let's talk about the players. Who is your favorite all-time Notre Dame player?
I'm going to give you one on each side of the ball. My favorite all-time Notre Dame player on offense is Brady Quinn. He just happened to be the quarterback at Notre Dame, 4 games like that Bush push game, which is, I became a Notre Dame fan whenever I was 8, 9 years old, but I became like a diehard whenever I was in my teenage years. And that's kind of when, Brady Quinn was, at the height of his powers. So, and then kind of from the same team on defense, Tom Zivikowski, safety, who all returned punts. He was an electric player and just a really cool story. And, so he was didn't have the greatest NFL career, career after Notre Dame, but he was definitely probably my, I have a number 9 jersey in my closet somewhere.
Ben, who's your favorite player right now?
That's a great question. I don't know, because I think as I've gotten older, and I'm kind of still on there, I think, but as I've gotten older, I analyze it more. And so, there's a little bit less of the pure fandom. Favorite player now, Dexter Williams was a guy that I liked a lot. He just went to the NFL. Man, I don't know. Probably Alohi Gilman, I guess, if I had to pick one. I for some reason, I like the safeties that fly all over the field. That kind of just excites me. And, he has a great story, transfer from the Naval Academy and that type of thing. And, if you hear him speak, he's a great leader type, and I kind of gravitate to those type of guys. So safety Alohi Gilman, I guess, takes the cake for right now.
And that's always the most fun question for me, is because the greatest players can typically, there can be a list, and it certainly can be debated, but the group of players, it's difficult to debate. Everyone comes up with generally the same list. But when you talk about favorite player, there's no criteria. It can be favorite for whatever reason you'd like it. And obviously the favorite players and the best players typically overlap for a lot of people, but at the same time, a lot of people gravitate for some particular backstory or a feel-good story or swag or whatever the case might be. Talking Notre Dame football Absolutely. With Ben Belden on Slap the Sign. Was there another player that came to mind?
Yeah, I think, a guy that actually I got to talk to a little bit in an interview whenever he committed to Notre Dame was Jafar Armstrong. So I kind of can't believe I forgot him. He, making the switch from wide receiver to running back was big for him last year. I think big things are on the horizon for him. So, I haven't really talked to him since he committed, but, I'd like to think that since I talked to him and things like he's a guy that I pull for, I guess, since I've had that a little bit of a relationship with him.
So who do you think is the best player on the roster right now? Whatever your criteria.
Probably it has to be one of the pass rushers, I would think. So I would say maybe Julian Okwara. Khalid Kareem is, kind of equal to that. But I think, that's Notre Dame's biggest strength is the pass rushing right now. So you've got to go with one of those guys. And I think, out of that group, I would guess I would have to say Julian Okwara is the best and maybe most important player for Notre Dame's defense. So that's what I'll go with right now. But the thing about Notre Dame, I guess, that I'm starting to realize as we're having this conversation is that there's just a lot of, Notre Dame doesn't have maybe the guys that stand way out from the crowd. They get them once in a while, the Jalen Smiths of the world. But I say Julian Okwara, but I guess in the back of my mind, I'm like, is there really even somebody that's far and away better than everyone else? I'm not convinced there is, but, for the sake of and spirit of answering the question, that's what I'll go with.
Okay. So let's look at the entirety of the program, and I believe that you'll probably take this back to the late 90s when you first became a fan. So who's been the greatest player during those 20 years?
I mean, again, I guess it depends on what the criteria is. Brady Quinn's up there. I mean, he almost won a Heisman. He had similar numbers to Matt Leinart, who did win the Heisman that year. So it's hard to argue that. I don't know. I mean, Justin Tuck was a really great defensive end, had great numbers, but he played on bad Notre Dame teams, so it's kind of also hard to argue it's Justin Tuck. Those are two guys that come to mind as far as, great players that, in the case of Brady Quinn, he was really only a great college player. So, I mean, I guess I don't know if that's part of the criteria or not, but those are the guys I'll go with. I'm sure I'm missing somebody, to be honest, that, some Notre Dame fan that's going to watch later will be like, how could you not name so-and-so? But on the spot, I'll go with Brady Quinn.
To me, it's a college award of sorts,
right,
or a college answer. So Tom Brady, for me, would not be a great all-time Michigan player, but obviously one of the greatest quarterbacks, if not the greatest quarterback of all time. So that's how I approach the question, just based on college merit. Tim Tebow, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in college, didn't pan out in the NFL, still one of the greats on the collegiate level. That's how I look at it. But hey, these are your questions, and you can frame them any way you want in regards to assessing your answers. All right. So we've covered the players, we've covered the games. Let's cover the program and expand it out to college football. So if there's one thing that you could change about Notre Dame football, and I have had answers, Ben, from changing calls that they thought were missed 20 years ago, to changing uniforms, to changing fight songs, to changing game day experience, to changing head coaches, past or present, on and on and on. So you can open it wide open to what you would change about Notre Dame football.
Once in a while, and this is not the answer, but I think once in a while, I kind of wish Notre Dame would just end a conference so that people would not talk about that anymore.
Guys like me?
But I mean, you came at it with a more intellectual answer than a lot of other people did. So, I mean, that's okay. But I think what I would change probably, and I even say this with a little bit of a caveat, but like Notre Dame is a little bit, I mean, I really appreciate the tradition at Notre Dame. And I appreciate that it's, Notre Dame places the emphasis on student athlete and not just athlete. However, I think it would be nice once in a while. I mean, you've got to be darn near a genius, even as a football player, to get into Notre Dame. I mean, there's not a lot of concessions that are made. And while I don't necessarily think Notre Dame needs to go out and find players that can't read or something like that to make their football team better, sometimes I think they could loosen those standards a little bit. And if they did, you wouldn't see as often a Notre Dame team getting blown out by Clemson on the biggest stage. So I guess that's what I would probably change. But like, I don't also want it to change so radically that Notre Dame's just like everybody else either, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, Notre Dame, Stanford in particular are at the high end of that situation that involves a collection of schools that include Vanderbilt and Northwestern and Duke, where they are competitive in football. They're really good, and in Notre Dame and Stanford's class, extremely good, top 10 to 15 typically. But they do have that barrier, that challenge that has to come into play. It's obvious it does come into play at times, and maybe keeping them from seriously challenging for national championships on a regular basis. Got Ben Belden on the line from Slap the Sign, talking Notre Dame football. And your comment in regards to Notre Dame and their affiliation with the ACC brings to mind that I think we have a discussion in our future that should be a whole lot of fun. And I don't know if that involved Notre Dame and the ACC or a college football playoff and how that should be structured, but we'll have to put that on hold and put our brains together to figure out what our point of contention was. I believe on Twitter maybe a month ago that had you serve up a conversation that I think would be a whole lot of fun.
Yes.
Was it the ACC affiliation? Maybe that's what it was.
Well, I mean, it's just, I don't particularly like Notre Dame's affiliation with the ACC as it is because I don't know, like I'd rather them be full conference or not conference at all, and not in the middle, I guess. And I I don't think they should be conference. Let's establish that. And that's kind of what I was sort of thinking about, because I just don't think that, and like I say, I don't want to spoil this whole conversation for later, but I just don't think that putting them in a conference gives them much benefit. I think they play a schedule that is comparable or better than teams who were in a conference, and that's kind of where I was coming from, I think. And like I say, I don't really like the ACC affiliation, although it does make for some, cool matches once in a while, Florida State, Miami, those types of rivalries, but I don't know.
So what I think, Ben, that you understood about the point I was trying to make, and I don't remember the course of the conversation and the back and forth exactly, but what people were jumping on me about, and they didn't get it, was I was not criticizing Notre Dame's schedule in terms of quality. That was not my argument. I rank the schedules every offseason, and I typically rank Notre Dame's as one of the 5 to 10 most difficult schedules in the country. Not necessarily this particular year, but it's not their fault. But I still think it's a top 40 or 45 schedule. I've got them ranked somewhere in that range. But sure, there are the Ohio States and Alabamas of the world running around scheduling a weak non-conference opponents, and I still think their entry into college football playoffs are legit, and they are certainly that good. So Notre Dame's schedule's very difficult. I have all the respect in the world for Notre Dame approaching its schedule. They can't play Michigan and Michigan State and Clemson every week. You're going to have your Ball States and your I think this year they've got the likes of New Mexico State and Bowling Green. Everyone does. I think they schedule extremely difficult. And last year just so happened to be down years for Florida State, USC, Virginia Tech, and a couple others that downturned the schedule. But in terms of who they go out and schedule, I have all the respect in the world for Notre Dame's scheduling approach.
Thank you for watching this video. If you are an ACC football fan, please subscribe to the channel. Leave us your thoughts down in the comments below. And for the latest in ACC football, keep it right here.